Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Senate's acquitted Donald J. Trump for inciting the deadly January 6th Capitol insurrection in his second impeachment trial. 57 senators backed convicting the former president, but the vote fell short of the two-thirds majority needed. It was the most bipartisan impeachment trial verdict ever, with 7 Republicans voting with Democrats to convict. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer blasted Republicans for siding with a president who tried to overturn an election and incited a mob to attack the Capitol.
This was about choosing country over Donald Trump, and 43 Republican members chose Trump. They chose Trump.
Shortly after the vote, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, who voted to acquit Trump, took to the floor to criticize the former president.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day.
But McConnell went on to defend his vote to clear Trump on constitutional grounds.
But in this case, the question is moot because former President Trump is constitutionally not eligible for conviction.
President Trump could have been tried while still in office, but it was Mitch McConnell who refused to bring senators back from recess in January to hold the trial. Calls are now growing for Trump to face criminal prosecution, as well as the formation of a government commission to investigate what happened. Meanwhile, some Republicans who voted to convict Trump are already facing fallout. Republican Senators Bill Cassidy of Louisiana and Richard Burr of North Carolina were both censured by their state parties for voting to convict Trump. We'll have more on the Senate trial after headlines. New information continues to emerge about the insurrection participants. The New York Times reports at least 6 people who were part of the mob that entered the Capitol, worked as security for Trump ally Roger Stone, and were linked to the far-right Oath Keepers. HuffPost is reporting at least 57 state and local Republican officials were at the Capitol insurrection, and almost all have faced calls to resign. Only 2 have stepped down. Both were arrested for taking part in the riot. In one case, a Florida County Commissioner, Joe Mullins, sponsored buses to transport people to Washington, D.C. In the lead-up to January 6, he said on a local radio program, quote, "Maybe there are some liberals I'd like to see their heads cut off." New COVID-19 cases in the U.S. continue to fall steadily as states around the United States start to loosen restrictions. Republican governors in Iowa, Montana, and North Dakota have lifted statewide mask mandates despite warnings from the Centers for Disease Control to leave mask requirements in place. Public health experts warn daily case numbers remain dangerously high and that rapidly spreading virus variants could create new surges. Researchers have found at least 7 fast-spreading coronavirus lineages in the U.S. with the same mutation, providing more evidence that variants are evolving to become more transmissible. The U.S. is now administering nearly 1.7 million COVID-19 vaccinations per day on average, surpassing President Biden's goal of 1.5 million a day. Chief White House medical advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci told NBC he believes the overwhelming majority of people in the U.S. could be vaccinated by the middle or end of summer.
By the time we get to April, that will be what I would call, for better wording, open season. Namely, virtually everybody and anybody in any category could start to get vaccinated.
Fauci said vaccines for children as young as 6 or 7 could be authorized by the start of the next school year. The CDC issued new guidelines Friday for schools to reopen safely. The agency says vaccinating teachers is not a prerequisite, but schools must adhere to strict measures including mandatory face masks, physical distancing, and contact tracing. CNN notes 99% of U.S. children live in what the CDC considers a red zone, an area with high levels of community transmission, for which the agency recommends virtual classrooms for middle and high schools and hybrid learning for elementary schools. A recent National Education Association survey found only 18% of teachers who responded were vaccinated, although a large majority wanted to be. White teachers have been vaccinated at over twice the rate of black teachers around the United States. A new British government study builds on earlier reports that a fast-spreading variant first found in the UK leads to an increased risk of hospitalization and could be up to 70% more deadly. This comes as disability rights advocates in Britain are condemning the discriminatory response by the government and hospitals in treating COVID-19 patients with mental disabilities. A recent investigation found do not resuscitate orders were given to people because they had mental disabilities, causing potentially avoidable deaths. CNN reports a World Health Organization team probing the origins of COVID-19 in Wuhan, China, believes the outbreak was much more widespread in December 2019 than officials have revealed. Elsewhere, New Zealand's largest city, Auckland, is in a 3-day lockdown after 3 coronavirus infections were identified. It's New Zealand's first lockdown in 6 months after Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's government stamped out the virus. Guinea has declared an Ebola epidemic after an outbreak killed at least 3 people and sickened 4 others. They're the first cases in Guinea since 2016, when health officials declared an end to the world's largest ever Ebola epidemic, which killed more than 11,000 people across West Africa. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has identified 3 new cases of Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In Burma, armored vehicles have been unleashed on the streets of major cities as mass protests opposing the military coup continued for the 10th consecutive day today. In the northern state of Kachin, security forces fired at a crowd of protesters that had gathered outside a power plant Sunday. They also used water cannons to disperse the crowd. 5 journalists were arrested while covering the clash. On Sunday, security forces raided the homes of several prominent critics of Burma's military coup. Activists around the world are calling on Indian authorities to free Disha Ravi, a 22-year-old climate activist who was arrested over the weekend. She's accused of sharing an online document, which was tweeted by Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, with information on how to support the ongoing farm workers' protest. Ravi is one of the founders of the Indian Fridays for Future Youth Climate Strike. In Somalia, a blast from a car bomb near the parliament headquarters in the capital, Mogadishu, killed at least 3 people and wounded at least 8 others on Saturday. The attack came amidst a deepening political crisis, which led to the postponement of elections last week. The militant group Al-Shabaab has threatened to attack the polls. Massive protests continue in Haiti as thousands are taking to the streets demanding the resignation of President Jovenel Moïse, accusing him of orchestrating a coup to remain in power beyond his term.
Moise had the support of Donald Trump, who he was using to bother Venezuela. We're calling on the Americans to abandon Trump's policy and to get rid of the terrorist, Moise, because his mandate has finished.
This comes as immigrant justice advocates continue to denounce the Biden administration's ongoing deportations of Haitian asylum seekers. A warning to our audience, the next story contains disturbing images of violence. Advocates across the United States are condemning the rise of racist violence against the Asian American community. Last month, an 84-year-old man from Thailand was killed in San Francisco after being attacked while on his morning walk. Just days later, a 91-year-old Asian man was shoved to the ground in Oakland's Chinatown. And in New York City last week, a 61-year-old Filipino man was slashed in the face while on the subway. Asian Americans say hate crimes and discrimination against their communities have been on the rise since the beginning of the pandemic. Some 2,800 incidents have been reported since last March, according to the group AAPI Hate. Stop AAPI Hate. Activists and allies in Oakland held a rally over the weekend. This is Connie Won, co-founder of Asian and Pacific Islander Women Lead.
What about that violence of living in poverty under a system that doesn't seem to care about our people? That's the violence we need to answer to. The vigilantes coming out here calling for more police, I need you to answer to that violence. I want you to represent for that. Our communities are also suffering deportation. Answer to that violence. Our people are in detention centers for an indefinite amount of times. I need you there for that too. And then, you're not even accounting for the gender violence that our women are experiencing. I need you to account for that.
Allegiant Airlines has come under fire after they kicked 4 black teenagers off a flight last week, leaving them stranded in Arizona, far from their homes in Sacramento, California. The teens were in Arizona with their basketball team and are part of a youth mentorship program called Voice of the Youth. Allegiant Airlines alleges they were not wearing their face masks properly, but the boys say they adjusted them when asked by airline staff. One teen says he was afraid for his life when police showed up to remove them from the plane. A coalition of international human rights and legal groups are preparing to submit a report to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights about racist police practices in the United States. The report will be based on the findings of the International Commission of Inquiry on Systemic Racist Police Violence against People of African Descent in the United States. As part of 3 weeks of hearings, Tamika Palmer, the mother of Breonna Taylor, testified before the commission about how her 26-year-old daughter was shot to death in her own home in Louisville by plainclothes officers serving a no-knock warrant.
Breonna was in one of the safest places in the world to be. She was home with the person she thought would protect her from the world. And he tried to do just that with the laws that are given to us to protect and serve our kingdoms. And when that law was broken, there was no accountability for the people that broke that law, for the people who perjured themselves to obtain a warrant that put those people in motion that night, for Daniel Cameron, who lied about the case he presented to the grand jury and getting justice for Bree, and never gave them the opportunity to charge the other officers, even when asked.
That was Breonna Taylor's mother, Tamika Palmer. You can read and watch all the testimonies from the Inquiry on Systemic Racist Police Violence at inquirycommission.org. The New York Police Department's arrested an individual in connection with 4 stabbing attacks on unhoused people in the subway over the weekend, which left 2 of the victims dead. NYPD announced it was adding 500 more police officers to patrol subways. Organizer Whitney Hugh responded on Twitter, "There's always money for more cops in the subway system, but never enough money to actually house the homeless and keep them safe and warm." In news from the White House, Deputy Press Secretary T.J. Ducklo has resigned. Following revelations last week, he made threatening and misogynistic comments to Politico reporter Tara Palmieri, telling her, quote, "I will destroy you," after she asked him to comment on his romantic relationship with an Axios reporter. Ducklo had originally been suspended for a week. President Biden told incoming staff during a swearing-in ceremony that if anyone spoke to a colleague with disrespect, quote, "I will fire you on the spot." And longtime investigative journalist Jim Ridgeway has died at the age of 84. Ridgeway was the Washington correspondent for the Village Voice for 30 years. He also wrote for Mother Jones, Ramparts, The New Republic, The Nation, and other outlets in a career that spanned 6 decades. In 2010, Jim Ridgeway co-founded Solitary Watch, focused on the plight of prisoners in solitary confinement. Some of their stories appeared in Ridgeway's book, Hell is a Very Small Place, Voices from Solitary Confinement. You can see our interviews with James Ridgeway at democracynow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. When we come back, the Senate's acquitted Donald Trump for inciting the deadly January 6th insurrection. We'll talk with a former Reagan administration lawyer about what the acquittal means and what the House Democratic managers could have done to change that verdict. Stay with us.